entrusting the apostles to continue the work he had started by instructing them to go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Jesus kindled the fires of a new religion in a world largely dominated by polytheism, cult leader worship, and mysticism. In the first century of its existence, Christianity was both welcome and vilified throughout the Roman Empire. Many of Christianity's original adherents were murdered by those who believe it is a danger to their authority, or at the very least, the cause of unrest among the populace. Christians themselves practiced the religion with great diversity, linked as much to local influences as theology, political intrigue, theological beliefs, and simple misunderstandings created a need for dialogue between the many practitioners of the growing faith. Christianity's adoption as the official faith of the Roman state tied it inevitably to the fortunes of the empire. This also helped to create a gulf between the two main theological branches of the religion, which remains to this day. My fellow learners, welcome to our new subject starting today. This subject is part of the courses offered by the Brokenshire College Graduate Studies under its Masters of Arts in Theology program, or MAT. If you are interested in earning this degree, since this is open for lay leaders and members of our church, you can leave your query in the comments section. In order to begin with our study, we need to situate the rise of Christianity in its own historical context, and that is within the Greco-Roman world. Ang term na Greco-Roman world refers to the land around the Mediterranean, from roughly the time of Alexander the Great to the time of the Emperor Constantine, who was ruling around the time of 300 AD. So, from about 300 BC to 300 AD in the lands around the Mediterranean. Ibig sabihin po, ang panahon na ito ay nagsimula sa panahon ni Alexander the Great na tinaguriang one of the most important figures in the history of Western civilization. Itong si Alexander the Great ay kilala din sa pangalang Alexander of Macedon. He was a great military genius who conquered most of the Mediterranean lands from his native land Macedonia in the east. Kung titingnan natin ito sa mapa ngayon, ito po ay yung Greece. Alexander started conquering Macedonia, then he conquered Greece, and he conquered the lands around Mediterranean, including Egypt, Palestine, and Persia. Subalit, hindi lang sa pagiging conqueror sumikat si Alexander the Great. He became important for the history of the West because of what happened in the wake of his conquest. Ito kasing si Alexander na in love sa kultura at civilization ng mga Greeks. At katunayan po, siya ay nagiging estudyante ng isang Greek philosopher na si Aristotle. Just imagine, si Socrates ang teacher ni Plato. At itong si Plato naman ay nagiging teacher niya si Aristotle. At si Aristotle ay minsan naging teacher ni Alexander the Great. Just imagine that. Si Alexander the Great ay hindi naman talaga nagiging philosopher. Subalit, gaya ng sinabi natin kanina, napamahal po sa kanya ang mga philosophical ways, culture, religion, and language ng mga Greeks. At ang nangyari po, habang kino-conquered niya ang mga lupain sa Mediterranean, papuntang Persian Empire at hanggang Egypt, he spread Greek culture among the places that he conquered. And from that time on, it became a very popular thing for the educated elite in this area to learn how to speak Greek and to adopt Greek ways, Greek customs, and Greek religions. Cities were built following the Greek patterns, And Greek became something that was known by the upper class elite who were in competition with one another to show that they were more sophisticated than their neighbors. Nagtatagisan ng galing ang mga elite sa pamamagitan ng pagsasalita at pagkikilos na parang isang tunay na Greek. Parang katulad lang din sa panahon natin ngayon. Sosyal kapag Western ang dating. In some way, ang Mediterranean ay na-unify dahil sa Greek culture na ini-introduce ni Alexander, which allowed for all sorts of things like travel, shared cultural experiences, shared religions, and so forth. Subalit, si Alexander the Great ay namatay as a very young man. He was born in the year 356 BC and died in the year 323 BC. He was only 33 years old. At dahil dito, ang kanyang kingdom ay hinati ng kanyang mga generals. So, the empire itself broke up. But the Hellenistic culture, meaning the Greek culture or Hellenistic culture that he had started, continued for centuries. Then, the Romans conquered most of the lands that Alexander had previously conquered. The Roman Empire eventually reached from Great Britain in the west to Syria in the east, and it extended into both the southern and the northern Mediterranean. It included North Africa, Egypt, and Palestine. And so, when I say the Greco-Roman world, I'm referring to these regions around the Mediterranean from the time of Alexander up to the time of the Roman Emperor Constantine. And it is very important to note that Christianity was born within this Greco-Roman world. Now, while it is important for us to understand the birth of Christianity by situating it in its geographical location, it is also equally important to understand the religious context of the Mediterranean at this time. At dahil dito, bigyan natin ng malaking panahon na pag-usapan ang mga relihiyon na nakapaligid sa Greco-Roman world habang nasa gitna ang Christianity. Majority po sa mga tao na nakatira sa Roman Empire ay tinatawag na pagans. Ang ibig sabihin po ay sila'y naniniwala sa maraming Diyos. They are polytheists who adhered to various locals and state religions. And scholars usually call these religions cults. Pero tandaan natin na ang meaning ng cult ay magkaiba po sa meaning ng cult sa panahon natin ngayon. Kasi ngayon, kapag sinabi na cult, we have a negative connotation on them. But when historians use the term cult, they are not referring to our modern understanding of the term. This term simply comes from the Latin word cultus deorum, which means the care of the gods. We have the same root in English when we say agriculture, meaning the care of the fields. Cultus deorum was the care of the gods. Cults are simply forms of ritual worship at majority ng mga tao sa Roman Empire ay mga polytheist. Sila ay naniniwala sa maraming Diyos at sila ay sumasali sa pag-aalay at pagsamba para sa mga local and states gods. Para sa mga ancient people, ang paniniwala sa maraming Diyos ay natural and very obvious. Sa ating panahon kasi ngayon ay iba. Ngayon, ikaw ay maniniwala sa Diyos or wala kang Diyos. Yan ang common sense sa mga tao ngayon. But the ancient common sense was that there are many gods, whether you will believe 3 gods or 30 gods. Ibig sabihin, wala pong atheist sa panahon ng Roman Empire. Kaya medyo makorek natin ngayon ang lumang iniisip natin na kaya pinipersecute ang mga Christians dahil sila ay naniniwala sa Diyos. Hindi po ganon. Walang magagalit sa iyo kung ikaw ay maniniwala ng Diyos sa panahon na yon. Ang mga pagans pa ang mag-aalok sa iyo na dagdagan mo naman yung Diyos mo dahil kawawa ka naman kung isa lang ang iyong Diyos. Well, sa ating mga future lectures, makita natin na ang mga Christians pa po who are worshiping one God ang tinatawag na atheist by the pagans. They were atheists because they did not worship the gods. These ancient people believe that there are gods, a lot of gods, in a lot of places and lots of purposes. Ang bawat lugar po ay may kanya-kanyang Diyos. Forest, sa rivers, sa streams, plains, fields, homes, and places within the homes. Like kitchen, mayroong God doon. Sa bedroom, mayroong gods doon. Sa garage, mayroong gods doon. All of these places had gods who were in charge of these various areas. Gods were in charge of everything involving human lives. May mga gods na in charge sa mga crops, in charge sa weather, sa war, and health. Various gods for various purposes for different places. Hindi lubos maisip para sa mga tao sa ancient world, bakit nagtiyatyaga ang mga Christian sa iisang Diyos? Why would you worship one God when you can have many? Kung baga para sa kanila, bakit ba gusto mo lang ng isang kaibigan na may marami naman dyan na pwedeng maging mabuting kaibigan? Why only have one God? There are a lot of gods out there. The point is, polytheism is just natural and obvious in this particular time. There were obvious kinds of gods at kasali na dito ang mga gods na naririnig natin sa mga ancient Greeks and Roman mythology na ginawaan na nga ng mga movies ngayon na paboritong-paborito ng ating mga younger generations. At may mga ranks pa ang mga gods na ito. Ang una ay tinatawag na Supreme God. Then, ang mga tinatawag na mga Great Gods. At dito nabilong ang mga Greek gods like Hera, Aphrodite, and the Roman gods like Jupiter, Juno, Venus, and many other great gods. These are great gods who are far beyond the people. Mga gods na walang pakialam sa buhay ng mga tao sa mundo. Now, under ng great gods ay ang mga local gods. They are also powerful deities who protected and cared for cities, towns, and villages. Mo na ang ilahang mga areas of responsibility. And below the local gods are the lesser gods who were in charge in local forests, local rivers, and local roads. Then, there are family gods who cared for the home. Lots of gods, lots of places with different degrees of power. These gods that we mention oversee every human function and activity. The crops, the health, war, love, and everything else. Ito ang tinatawag na the divine realm ng mga pagans. Para itong isang pyramid. Sa taas ang Supreme God, the head God. Ang Supreme God nila noon ay si Zeus. And below the Supreme God are the great gods. Below the great gods were the local deities. And below the local deities are the divine men. Ano itong mga divine men? Naniniwala din kasi ang mga pagans na may mga tao na may divine aspects sa kanilang pagkatao. Ito ang mga divine men. Pinaniniwalaan nila na ito daw ay mga anak ng Supreme God or Great Gods na mayroong human na ina. Example, si Zeus. Nagkakagusto ng isang magandang dilag. Pumunta si Zeus sa mundo at nagkaroon sila ng intimate relationship at sila ay nagkakaanak. Ang anak ng gods sa isang human mother ay pinaniniwalaang divine men. Itong mga stories na ito ay makikita natin sa mga movies ngayon. Example, Hercules, no? Alam na alam niyo si Hercules. Si Achilles sa movie na Troy. Usually, ang mga emperor ay pinaniniwala ang mga divine men. Remember, may mga emperor na nag-claim na sila ay Diyos because of that belief. It is important to understand that when Romans talk about the emperor being God, they did not mean the one chief God or the great gods. They did not think that he was Zeus or one of their deities. He was a divine man. Somebody who was far beyond the rest of us in power and in his ability. Ang mga emperor kasi ay mga magagaling sa mga larangan ng buhay. Now, how can they be so magnificent and so great? It's because, in fact, they were divine being. Anak ng gods sa isang human mother. Kaya mistizo God ito sila. So, he was a member of the divine realm even though he was there as a human. And so, this is the divine realm for most pagans who were polytheists. Now, it's very important to understand that religion for this kind of people was not a matter of securing the afterlife, the way it is for many people today. Today, the principal reason for people for being religious is to secure the afterlife. Gusto natin na kapag namatay na tayo dito sa mundo ngayon, mayroon tayong another buhay kasama ang Panginoon. Aminin man natin or sa hindi, many people were religious because we want to secure the afterlife. Kahit tanungin pa natin ang ating mga sarili ngayon. But that's not the case in the ancient world. In fact, religion is not a matter of securing the afterlife. Ancient religion is a matter of honoring gods who could protect and assist mortals now in the present because of their needs. Ang mga ancient people kasi ay parating nasa bingit ng kamatayan. Wala kasi silang mga sophisticated na gamit ng hospital noon. You know what? It was common for women to die in childbirth or for children to die as infants. Wala silang ganon na mga kagamitan noon, katulad sa ating mga hospitals ngayon. Ang bawat babae noon kasi ay required na magkaroon ng at least 5 children kasi kaunti pa masyado ang mga tao. Now, ilang babae ang manganganak at mamamatay araw-araw. This is a world in which there was not modern medicine. Just imagine, maraming taong namamatay dahil lang sa infection sa kanilang ngipin. They had no way of fighting the infection before. People can't control such things. They cannot control illness. They cannot control the drought. They cannot control crop failure. If one season you don't get sufficient rain, in the next season your village will die from starvation. Therefore, the worship of the gods was intended to provide for humans that which they cannot provide for themselves. Para sa kanila, ang mga gods lang ang makaprovide sa kanilang needs upang mabuhay, like rain, health, prosperity, love, and even peace. One of the motivating factors in ancient religion was the fear of the gods. Sa totoo lang talaga, wala namang pakialam ang mga gods sa buhay ng tao. Wala namang gods na nag-care, but gods were to be feared because they could bring calamities. Kapag nagagalit ang God of Rain, baka isang taon walang ulan. Kapag nagagalit ang God of Health, baka may darating na pandemic. Iyan ang paniniwala nila noon. If the gods were not worshipped the way they were supposed to be worshipped, their wrath will be manifested to humans like earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, famines, drought, disease, and many others. These are things that the gods can bring if they are not worshipped properly, ayon sa paniniwala ng mga pagans. Therefore, religion sought the peace of the gods. This is the technical term in the ancient religion called the Pax Diorum, the peace of the gods. If the gods were at peace both among themselves and with people, then things will go well. So, do you want to make sure that the gods were on your side? Then religion is a way of making sure that that happens. Ang mga gods, hindi sila nag-demand ng exclusive devotion. Walang pakialam ang mga gods kung ilang gods ang sinasamba mo noon. Basta gawin mo lang ang mga rituals na gusto nila, then things might go well. You just maintain the peace of the gods. Hindi ko makalimutan habang nag-lecture ako nito sa seminary, may isang estudyante na nagsabi, Pastor Raot, based sa lecture mo ngayon, masasabi kong may mga Christian ngayon na parang pagans ang style. Ewan ko kung ano ang ibig sabihin niya. Now, what are these ritual acts? Well, the gods were worshipped principally through the acts of prayer and especially sacrifices. Sacrifices of animals in particular. Pagans have temples throughout their time. May mga majestic temples para sa mga great gods at may mga simple temples para sa mga local gods, and even within a home, there might be a sanctuary dedicated to a god. Sacrifices to God were performed in the temples. Usually, para sa mga city gods, mayroon silang set na time for particular day of sacrifice. And this was a time for celebration for the ancient pagan people. Most pagans, most people in the ancient world, will not eat meat very regularly. Subalit sa araw ng sacrifice para sa city gods, yan ang time na makakain sila ng karne. This will be a party time. Dahil ang sacrifices nila ng mga animals ay hindi po iyon itatapon. After sa sacrifices, may mga sunog siguro na part sa mga sacrifices, subalit hindi naman ito lahat na aabo. May mga edible portion pa talaga. At ito ay kanilang isi-share sa lahat. Kaya, maintindihan natin ng husto kung bakit sinabi ni Apostle Paul na bawal kumain ng mga meat na galing sa sacrifice ng mga gods. Dahil ito ang konteksto. Pagan worship the gods by saying prayers and performing acts of sacrifice. These were periodic affairs. God do not expect any kind of constant devotion. Ito ang kaibahan sa Christian God kaysa pagan gods. Walang pakialam ang pagan gods basta sa panahon sa sacrifice, kompleto ang iyong inialay. At ito ang importanteng dapat nating pansinin. Ethics were not part of the features of ancient pagan religions. Pagan religion were not interested in ethical behavior of how you relate to your neighbors, to your family, and others. Ethics was more of a philosophy in the ancient world rather than a religion. Hindi natin sinabi na unethical ang mga pagans. No, hindi. In fact, kung tutuusin, mas ethical pa ang mga pagans kaysa ibang tao ngayon. But it just so happened that ethics is not part of their religion. It is part of their philosophy. Also, there is a question that is interestingly enough for modern people. Was correct doctrine an issue in ancient religion? Ang tanong na ito ay napakahalaga, lalo na sa mga Christians na naniniwala that what you believe really matters. But in the ancient pagan religions, what you believe don't matter at all. There were no creeds, there was no heresy, there was no orthodoxy. Paganism were not religions that were concerned about doctrine. They were religions that were concerned with sacrifices to the gods. Ang importante lang sa kanila ay ang pag-follow sa mga set na principles and set na rituals that had been developed over the years. Now, since doctrine was not important to these religions tended to be highly tolerant of one another. Unlike what you might expect, people today might think of the Roman religions as being intolerant. At iniisip natin na ang mga Christians were persecuted by these people because we have a different God, which is not true. But by and large, these pagan religions were highly tolerant of one another because there was no idea if you had a correct doctrine or not. Kasi wala silang doktrina, hindi nila iniisip para sa kanila ang lahat na gods, kahit sino man yan, deserved to be worshipped. And so, paganism is a highly tolerant and embracing sort of religion. Now, itong state gods, dapat talaga lahat ng tao mag-worship nito. Bahala ka na dyan kung ano ang mga gods na idadagdag mo. Basta nandyan yung mga state gods. Okay? Para bang naka-default talaga yung state gods. Lahat na tao mag-worship sa state gods. And if somebody refuses to worship the state god, kalaban mo na ang gobyerno. That would be a political act choosing not to worship the state god. At mayroon na kayong kaunting idea ngayon bakit nagiging kalaban ng Christianity ang Roman Empire. Mura pud na kung wala ka mo respeto sa Philippine flag. No? 'Di ba sa sinihan kapag pinatugtog na ang national anthem, tatayo talaga lahat kasi may parusa kung mahuhuli kang hindi tumatayo or nahihiya ka na makikita sa iba. The state gods were to be worshipped along with other gods. Intolerance within religion was reserved by and large only for immoral or socially disruptive form of worship. Pero kung normal worship lang, walang problema kahit anong gods. And so, that's pagan religion basically like. The worship of many gods according to ancient tradition, usually involving prayer and sacrifices in the temple. Sa ating mga future lectures po, makikita natin ang kaibahan ng Christianity, especially in its emphasis in doctrine and in ethics. Christianity is an intolerant religion and intolerant in relationship to other religions because Christians maintain that they were right. And since they were right, everyone else was wrong. Something that pagans did not claim for themselves. Now, let's go to another group. It's called Judaism. Within the ancient world, hindi lang pagans ang nakapaligid sa Christians. Nandyan din ang Judaism. Bago pa isinilang ang Christianity, matagal nang nandyan ang Judaism sa context ng Greco-Roman world. Medyo kaunti lang ang mga Jewish. Sila po ay mga 7% lang sa kabuuhang population ng Roman Empire doon sa time na nagsimula ang Christianity. During that time, ang population ng Roman Empire ay 60 million, maybe 60 million. And Jewish ay 7%, ibig sabihin mayroong 4 million Jews sa time na nag-umpisa ang Christianity. The Jews were located not only in Palestine but throughout the entire Mediterranean. Now, the Jewish religion was like other religions in several ways. Katulad din ng mga pagans, ang mga Jews din ay nagbibigay importansya sa prayer and sacrifice to the one God. One God man sila. At specific time and specific place. Almost the same sa mga pagans. This prayer, these acts of sacrifices were performed to secure divine favor. So God would look kindly upon His people. At upang hindi magagalit ang Diyos sa kanyang mga sangkatauhan. The point is, in many ways, the Jewish religion was like other religion. They had a temple in Jerusalem, sacrifices were performed there, and prayers were performed there, and many others. But in other ways, Judaism was distinct, very distinct in several ways compared to pagan religions. Jews insisted on worshiping only one God. This made them unusual. In the Roman world, where everybody else believes on the multiplicity of gods, Jews worship only one God. But that's not to say that Jews believe in only one God. It is to say that Jews believes you should worship only one God. Take note, sa Ten Commandments sinabi, "You shall have no other gods before me." Yung phrase na yan, na "no other gods before me," it presupposes that there are other gods. It's just that they are not to be worshipped before the God of Israel. Kaya mayroong dalawang term na kailangan nating ma-familiarize. Ito ang number one ay henotheism. Henotheism is the idea that you are only to worship one God. While another term is the monotheism. Monotheism is the belief that there is only one God. So some Jews are henotheists and some were monotheists. Jewish had ancient tradition that they had written down. Jews had scriptures, okay? This made them somewhat unusual in the ancient world. The other pagan religions did not have scriptural authorities for their perspectives. Jews did have scriptures, the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. The first 5 books in the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, this book shows forth the traditions of Israel and show forth how God chose Israel to be His people. Now, the Jewish people believed that God had made a covenant with them. Now, the term covenant was a legal term which means an agreement. The legal agreement that they had was that God would be their God who would protect and defend them in exchange for their devotion to Him. That was the agreement. God chose these people to be His people, and in exchange, they do the things that God asked, as set forth in the law or the Torah. This law then taught the children of Israel how to worship this God and how to live together in community. So those are the major overriding points of the Torah. How to worship God in ways appropriate to Him and how to live together in community. Yan ang kabuuhang tema ng Torah. Ngayon, pag-usapan natin ang mahalagang bagay tungkol sa Jewish na palaging na misunderstood sa mga Christians for so long. Ang pagkaintindi kasi natin, ang Torah or Jewish law ay burden na nagpapahirap sa mga Jewish people. Yan ang ating paningin. Subalit, para sa mga Jewish people, the Torah or law was seen by the Jewish people as a gift. The one God who created the world has chosen us as His people and has given us His law that we can follow. Para bang binigyan sila ng map para alam nila kung saan pupunta. Ikaganda niyan. Ano ba ang pabigat sa Torah? Mayroon bang pabigat ang Torah dyan? You should not murder one another. You should not take somebody else's spouse. You should not bear false witness in court. Those were not overly difficult rules to follow. Aside from the ethical rules, kasali din doon sa Torah ang mga bagay na magpakita na sila ay distinct as a people. There were certain food laws. You should not eat shellfish or pork. There were certain other ritual laws also. You should not work on the Sabbath. Pahirap ba yan kung bigyan ka ng pahinga sa Sabbath day? Hindi naman siguro yan papahirap. Para sa mga Jewish people, hindi yan pabigat. This is seen as a great good by the Jews because this God giving His guidance to His people. para itong isang blueprint kung paano maka-keep up ang mga Jewish people sa kanilang covenant sa Panginoon. And so, Jews understood that there was only one God to be worshipped who made a covenant with His people Israel. The law was the part of that covenant. It has to be followed so that Jews can stay within His right relationship with God. Now, baka akala natin na iisa lang ang grupo ng mga Jewish people. No. Ancient Judaism was a monolithic religion. Ibig sabihin, diverse ang Jewish people. There were some Jews who emphasized that what God really wanted was for the people to adhere properly to the temple in Jerusalem. They emphasized the sacrificial aspect of the Jewish religion. No, ang pinaka-importante sa kanila, yung sacrifices para sa gods, doon gagawin sa temple at bibilhin mo yon. And there were also groups, other Jewish group, who stressed the importance of keeping the Jewish law as fully as possible within their daily lives, so that the laws that God gives are to be followed down to the very detail. Okay? Ang pinaka-importante sa kanila ay ang law. And there are also Jews that emphasizes the importance of maintaining purity before God. They thought that what really matters to God was not just the sacrifices or keeping the laws, but the keeping of personal purity before God. Sila po ay namuhay sa isang uri ng monastic life to maintain their own purity apart from the contaminating influences of the society, bad influences of the society. And lastly, there were other Jews who insisted to overthrow the forces of evil in the world. At sila ay gumamit ng armas in ushering the divine intervention of God in overthrowing the forces of evil. My friends, to fully understand the beginning of Christianity, we need to understand the kind of Judaism that Jesus Himself embraced, and to see how His teaching came to be developed after His death by His Jewish followers. And that will be the next subject in our next lecture. Thank you for listening.